So apparently, Trump just told Canada exactly what he wants. And it's almost impressive how little shame is involved here. Drop the retaliation, get American booze back on the shelves immediately, open up dairy and autos, and when Canada asks about lumber, well, the answer is basically, well, don't hold your breath. So let me get this straight. Canada is being told to move quickly on the things that Washington wants, while the things that Canada wants are still being negotiated. That's the offer on the table 4 days before the deadline Trump himself set.
And Prime Minister Carney's response so far? Well, it's not to panic, which is apparently driving Washington crazy. Because as of Friday, Dominic LeBlanc was telling Canada's Trade Advisory Group the two sides are still miles apart. This is not a stalled negotiation. It's a shakedown with a deadline, Trump's usual playbook. In Canada, you know what? We're not playing that game anymore.
So let's actually itemize this, because when you list it out, you really understand why Canada hasn't signed yet. The first demand is retaliation. Trump's Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has been beating this drum from the beginning. He says Canada's remaining retaliatory measures have to be resolved if Canada wants to avoid these new 50% tariffs.
So let me get this straight. The United States started this trade war. They imposed tariffs on Canadian products. Canada responded with tariffs of its own. And now Greer is pointing to Canada's response as one of the reasons for another round of tariffs. Why the hell would we take those tariffs off when we have no idea what we're going to get for it?
It makes absolutely no sense. Then there's alcohol. Most Canadian provinces pulled American wine and spirits from government-controlled shelves during the trade fight, and that has hurt American producers. Boo-hoo, right? The White House says U.S. alcohol exports to Canada have fallen dramatically, and Washington now wants those products back in Canadian stores quickly if an agreement is reached.
Well, if Jamieson Greer or any of his lackeys would have bothered to learn anything about the Canadian parliamentary system, they would have known that Ottawa doesn't even control most of those liquor stores. That's provincial jurisdiction. He went so far as to say that U.S. won't tolerate Canadian retaliation staying in place, as if Canada owes an apology for defending itself.
Now, let's flip that. What does Canada get for all that? Just vague noise about reducing some Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum? No number attached even? And on lumber, the industry that's been getting hammered for years? CTV's own sources say Washington has shown, quote, little interest in significant relief. So the pitch is this: give up everything now and maybe someday something comes back. I don't think so. Canadians are not going to swallow that pill anytime soon.
And premiers of the provinces are making it crystal clear as well. Quebec's government came out publicly demanding Ottawa protect supply management. That's dairy, poultry, eggs, the whole system that Canadian farmers built their financing around. When a premier says that out loud, it's a warning shot. Dairy cannot quietly become the price that Prime Minister Carney pays just to make a deadline disappear.
Listen, Carney's not negotiating in a vacuum here, right? He has premiers watching him, dairy farmers watching him, steel workers watching him, auto workers watching him, and forestry communities watching him. Every concession that sounds small in the U.S. lands somewhere very specific here in Canada.
Which brings us to one of the more interesting voices this week, because it isn't coming from the federal government at all. Mark Carney isn't the only one refusing to blink. Unifor's Lana Payne. That's the union covering steel workers, auto workers, and forestry. She came out and said if there's no deal, Canada has no choice but to retaliate. And she's talking export taxes and counter tariffs. That's the labor market telling Ottawa, don't you dare fold on our behalf. Canada, we are a united people.
And I think we should explain what export tax is, because it does flip the usual script. Instead of taxing American goods coming in, Canada taxes its own resources going out, making them more expensive for U.S. buyers who don't have anywhere else to get them. So think about energy, potash, and critical minerals. the things that Trump deliberately cut out of the 50% tariff order. He built the wall and then quietly cut holes in it for the stuff that he can't live without. That gives Canada leverage.
I hear this all the time from PP and other conservatives that Canada's economy is on its knees and needs a deal at any price. Wow, they really think highly of Canada, don't they? Except it isn't. And the numbers make that case look ridiculous, just like most of PP's arguments. It's all bluster and no substance 24/7. So let's get to the numbers. Manufacturing sales posted their fifth straight monthly increase, hitting a record of $235 billion for the quarter in the middle of a trade war that was supposed to leave Canadian factories gasping for air.
And RBC is now revising second quarter GDP growth up to around 3.4% annualized. That's a serious upgrade from where forecasters had it just a few months ago. They also estimate the goods targeted by this new round of the 50% tariffs, they represent about 0.4% of Canadian GDP and employment directly. They're not forecasting that Canada automatically loses 0.4% of GDP either, and that distinction is huge. Across a $3 trillion economy, the direct exposure here is relatively contained.
And here's the number that actually matters most. Even with these new 50% tariffs threatened, roughly 80% of what Canada sells into the U.S. is still moving duty-free under CUSMA. This relationship, it's strained under Trump, but it's not shattered. Canada has room to negotiate, and there's no need to panic yet.
And while Canada's posting record manufacturing and upgraded growth, well, the U.S. picture looks a lot shakier than the stock market headlines suggest. July payroll data showed the U.S. losing 23,000 jobs, and wage growth has slowed to its weakest pace since 2021, while groceries and utilities, they keep climbing up and up for ordinary families.
Trump's out there celebrating record highs on Wall Street like it's a report card for the whole country, not just the billionaires. But corporate profits and household paychecks are apparently living in two different economies right now, and he couldn't care less. Add in a national debt where the interest payments alone are ballooning past what the government spends on entire departments, and you start to understand why Washington's in such a hurry to get this deal signed before Wednesday. They need a win a lot more than they're letting on.
So between now and Wednesday, here's what I suggest. I would ignore most of the theater and watch the actual concessions. Does Washington put a real number on steel and aluminum relief? Does lumber move at all? Does Canada retain some of its own retaliatory leverage until American tariffs actually come down?
And make sure to watch the provinces too, because the alcohol issue could become an interesting test. Washington wants those bottles back on the shelves quickly, but premiers know the boycott has been one of Canada's most visible pressure points. Giving that up for very little return would be politically difficult.
For sure. Canada's got the numbers here. And the U.S., it has the deadline. And right now, Washington still hasn't put enough on the table to make giving up Canada's leverage look like a good trade.
So, here's our question for you today. If you were Prime Minister Carney walking into August 19th with lumber still off the table and steel relief still vague, would you sign anyway to make the deadline go away? Or do you call the bluff and let Washington explain to its own exporters why the deal fell apart? That's where it'll hurt Trump.
Yeah, let us know in the comments because this affects every Canadian right now. And while you're down there, check out the pinned comment for our merch store, our Substack, and of course, the private Facebook group.
And give it a like, hype, and a share to get the word out to more people that Canada is doing just fine. We need to spread the word, and all of your support really helps.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.